All right, we can go ahead and kick it off. I just wanted to say welcome everybody to the El Toro webinar today. Today we will be talking about the power of political data with L2 and El Toro. So we're very excited. We have a lot of good content for today, and we are joined by two really awesome panelists. My name is Jordan Johnson. I am the Director of Customer Experience here at El Toro, and I am joined by Stacy Griggs, who is the CEO here at El Toro. Stacy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm happy to be on the webinar and talk about one of the things that I really enjoy doing most, which is helping political campaigns figure out who to target and how to get the right ads to the right people.
Awesome, thank you. Stacy is an expert in all things El Toro and political, so he has a lot of really great knowledge and experience in both ecosystems. So please feel free to ask away today, ask any questions that you have, and we will make sure to cover some in the Q&A at the end of the webinar. Next, we have our special guest, Paul Westcott. He is the EVP over at L2 Data. So, Paul, would you mind just introducing yourself and maybe giving us a little run through of what L2 is?
Sure. Thanks so much, Jordan, and Stacy and everyone on the El Toro team for having me. Yeah, Paul Westcott with L2. I've been with the company for about 10 years, and I would say, L2's biggest proficiency is bringing in voter files from all 50 states and DC. We go right to the secretaries of state, county boards of election, collect those data, clean them up, remove people who have died, moved out of state, and go through a whole lot of other hygiene processing as well as appending. So adding on hundreds of fields of demographics, consumer, donor, and modeled information to make it so campaigns can then easily make selections and then go work with wonderful platforms like El Toro, where they can then take those targeted segments and then activate upon them. So that's what we do here, both on the voter side and the consumer side, but we're going to talk all voter stuff today. So thanks again for having me.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, Paul has been with L2 for quite some time, so he is extremely knowledgeable about political data, all things political, and a very good resource to have today. So again, I encourage anybody attending today to please ask any questions that they have in that little Q&A chat, and we will get to those at the end of the webinar. But let's go ahead and get started. So today I want to go over a little bit about El Toro. Here at El Toro, we are, leaders and at the forefront of observing and understanding human behavior. We have been in business for about 10 plus years. We were founded in 2013, and throughout that time, we have established about 21 patents, with a few more actually pending. So that's very exciting and really helps us maintain that competitive advantage in the ad tech world. We also have an in-house development stack. So if anytime we get any hiccups or any issues, we can send that right over to our development team, and they are very, very timely with how we resolve things to make sure that our customers and our clients are taken care of. Also, if you are familiar with the ad tech space or just advertising in general, you'll know how important it is that we are 100% cookie free. So that's one of our top differentiators here, is that all of our advertising, all of our data, everything like that is 100% cookie free. So that really helps us stick out from the crowd. Next, we will kick it back over to Paul, and Paul will be showing us a little demo of the L2 platform and kind of talking through some data points and some use cases for what we can do with this data. Paul?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jordan. And what I'll do is I'll quickly go into data mapping, which I'm going to show you, which is our visualization tool, but it's also the way to work with the data. So it allows you to cut selects and then take those selects and then work with them in platforms, including El Toro in a nice cookie-free way. So what we can do first, I'll share my screen. What you can do, and you can, of course, do this in all 50 states and DC, and if you can't see it for some reason, let me know. But what we have is North Carolina up. I picked it because, we have a lot of early return data there, and I want to be able to showcase some of that. But also, it's a big, diverse state, has a lot of different things going on in it. It's a swing state, so it's also interesting to dive into. One of the great parts about the L2 platform is it kind of acts as your hub, and then all of the different partners who we work with, it can be a spoke. And the nice part about El Toro is they have our whole file onboarded, which means you can take IDs from this platform and send it right over to El Toro. So what we can do first, though, in this tool is at a very granular level, you can zoom down to an area. I'm going to go down to the Raleigh area. You can go down to an individual household, and we have a lot of people on this call, so I'm not going to go into it, but you could actually click on these individual households here, and you can see, get down right to that level, click on it, and you can see all the different attributes for each of those individuals that we have within there. So it's always good when you're checking on the data, working with a solid data source. What you're going to want to do is go in, make sure that your information's right, make sure your neighbor's information's right, go in and check on it. Then from there, you want to look at some of the sort of big core segments that we have here on the right-hand side. And this is where you're going to make some selects. This includes things like people who have recently moved to the district, to the state. We have all the updated states and districts, as well as the 2024. These are the proposed or the new updated court districts that are in here as well. So you want to make sure, again, you're geofencing around the correct districts, that you've got all of the right information. And a good way to check that is simply by going in, making a select. So we'll do Congressional District 4. And you'll see in just a moment that's going to select and allow us to zoom down to it. And you get the idea that you can actually go in. From there, you can go and micro-target based on vote history, consumer information, ethnic information, all kinds of different coding that we have in the file, as well as some of our modeling, which I'm going to get into as well. But some of the big flags that have been very popular recently, I'll kind of go over like the top 5 or so. Have been the mover flags. Now, movers comes in 2 categories. These are people who have moved from within the state, and then people who have come from out of state. So we've had a lot of people very interested in looking at that. So if you opened up new to state, for example, you'd be able to see all the people, and this is within the last 6 years, sorry about that, within the last 6 years who have moved to the state of North Carolina, who are registered to vote in another state, filed a permanent change of address with the Postal Service or another private service, and now are living in North Carolina and registered to vote. You can see the states from which they moved, their previous party affiliation, and previous vote history. So it's bringing over that information that's building a better sort of identity around an individual versus just saying, well, snapshot in time, they've only voted once, so they must be a low propensity voter. This gives you a better background, and we incorporate those data into some of our modeling for turnout and things like that. We also have recently added urbanicity, which is urban, suburban, rural classifications. And this is something you actually click on these 3 dots here, and you can see the different areas throughout. So you have suburban areas in red, urban areas in blue, and rural areas in black, and you can kind of see the different outlines of places. So when somebody says, I need a segment of suburban women with kids who have a household income of over $250,000, you can quickly query that in this database, pull out those IDs, send them to El Toro, and start activating on that. And of course, that can all be subdivided by congressional, state leg districts, whatever the case might be. Some of the other popular demographic segments that I have in here as well. Of course, vote history is going to be incredibly important. That's right down here. So you not only have the known vote history based on very specific elections, but you also can get into some of the early voting and early and absentee information. What's nice in L2 is we have a single select here. It's voting or voted early or absentee. So in addition to getting those individuals, I'll just pause here while this loads up, but getting these individuals, whether they've voted early in person, early by mail. In some states, you can even see if they've received a ballot, if they've requested a ballot, so you know that you can go after those people long before the election and start going after them. And then if you want to suppress or remove those people who have already voted, you simply can go unknown. And now you're working with all the people who have not returned their primary ballot. Now, of course, we had the primary in North Carolina the other day, but we're still collecting that early return information as it continues to trickle in. So you've got 6.1 million voters who did not show up, or at least have not shown up yet in the early return data. Quickly, some of the other information that we have in here, obviously, this is some of the consumer information, income, education level. You have contribution information. And I would also say one of the biggest things that our users tend to focus on is, of course, the Haystack DNA issue models. We've been working with Haystack since 2015, and this is something where you could actually go in on a very specific issue like the environment, for example, Green New Deal, and find those voters that are most likely to support or oppose that issue. We have this for general ideology as well as partisanship. We have scores based on Trump v. Biden. We have a lot of different candidate models. We're working on adding a large number, but we have things like immigration and border wall. We have abortion. So a lot of those core key issues to be able to target people instead of trying to guess or build out a persona by saying, oh, they should look like this with this party ID. You could simply come in and find those people who are flagged as support or oppose. And this is all available within the L2 data mapping tool. And of course, if you want access to this for your state, we do provide it a 3-week demo for free. So please just reach out. I'm happy to set you up with it and use the data, obviously, in all kinds of different ways, but through our partners at El Toro.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. I did have a couple questions come through. While we're kind of hot on that topic, I would like to ask one, but just a reminder, we will cover most of these at the end. So this specific question says, Paul, as you clean up data from Secretary of State offices, what % of records do you have to remove? Deceased, moved, out of state, etc.?
Yeah, this is a huge part of the hygiene and cleanup that we do, and really what, why why we're in business essentially, which is the state voter files are a little raw, a little rough, and so what we do is we remove people. The single biggest group is going to be people that have moved out of state. If you move within the state, we carry over your registration. So if you move, and we were just looking at North Carolina from, let's say, Raleigh to Durham, we'll carry that over. We'll put you in your new district. We bring over all of your vote history. And so we're essentially carrying that over and creating a new record, waiting for you to come onto the rolls there. But if you move out of state, we remove you. People who are deceased, we remove you as well. On average, it's around 4 to 5% per development, and L2 does 4 to 6 developments of each state per year. So that's going to be sort of the change that you're going to see. Some states, it's a little more aggressive. States like New York, where they keep people on the rolls for a very long time. I lived there 20 years ago and I'm still on the rolls. So, I still have to be removed each time. So the percentage is far higher in states that don't clean up. But we do our best, as well as with Social Security, death index, and private death files to keep the files as clean as possible.
Thanks for that clarification. There were a couple more, but we will save those till the end just so that we can kind of keep moving here. The next part that we are going to talk about today is El Toro's political capabilities, kind of taking what Paul just went over, what you can pull from the L2 system, and kind of implementing that into activation in El Toro. So over here on the left side of the screen, we have a couple examples. I'm kind of going to ask Paul, what type of data would you pull out of your system for this initiative? And then Stacy can talk about a little bit of the activation on the El Toro side. So for example, example number 1, we have an open seat, single party heavy district. Primary winner is expected to win the general. Paul, what would you do with this information?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of different, data points to be able to work from on this. But if you have an open seat, obviously, in many of these cases, you're going to want more than just your core voters, right? You don't want to just go after that small micro target of your universe. You want to look at everybody. But when you're dealing with an open seat, you really want to look at everybody. You want to understand how the district works. And we have a lot of open seat congressional races this year. And a lot of them are focused around being able to bring in those independents, looking at the moderates. So they're not just, if they're a Republican, even in the primary, they're buying Republicans and independents to try to pull people over, talk to those people early. Single party heavy district. If you have a one party district, and this is also could apply to the primary winner is expected to win the general. When you're dealing essentially with a one party district, you do want to focus on that one party, but you also do want to focus on independents. honestly, I would even focus on the minority party in this case, because you'd want to make sure that, at the very least, you're speaking to some of those persuadables. And what I was talking to Jordan about right before this call started was that we saw such low turnout in California, for example, in the primary. When things get that low, when you start to see low turnout, sort of the big cohorts that are pushing through, the national Democrats, the national Republicans, that starts to waver a little bit. You start to find little pockets of groups that could sway elections, especially in local races. So I wouldn't ever take anything for granted, even if you're a D or an R plus 10, plus 13. In low turnout elections, this is where targeting really, really matters to get those people out.
Mm-hmm. And Stacy, kind of to counter that, how would we go about using this data, and kind of what would we do on our side in-house at El Toro?
Yeah. And Paul's exactly right. I mean, targeting matters, and targeting matters. Targeting is probably the most important thing that people overlook when they think about what they're doing with how they spend their electoral money. Imagine the amount of money that's still spent on broadcast TV, for example, versus OTT. With El Toro, we can target individual households on OTT of who we know votes, what party they're registered in, just registered voters, just in your district. But when you go broadcast, you're basically picking a demography based off of the demography of the show. It's 1960s level targeting. There's a little bit better targeting where you can target like a zip code, but the thing is, we're getting down to an individual household. So we're taking great data from a partner like L2, and then we're adding great targeting to it. And we see in like some of these low turnout races that literally the difference between targeting for broadcast and narrowcast with us is sometimes 20-1, that we're 20 times more targeted than like a just regular broadcast message, which means you get 20 times more ads for your dollar. Or you can, a campaign with with 5% of the budget can basically deliver the same ad load from an effective basis as one with 20 times the budget. But the other thing that, and how we know this, is we are very focused on measuring results. In fact, most firms that do what we do, that are in the ad tech space, that deliver ads, when the election's over, they forget about you. They don't bother to go back and say, well, did it work? We've worked in, between, call it 15 and 20,000 races over the last 10 years. We're going to work in over 5,000 races this year alone. And every year after the election, we go back and say, what did we learn? What campaigns were more successful? What campaigns were less successful based off of the data we have? So we find that like when we target high fidelity voters, that our clients that target high fidelity voters are 17.5% more likely to win than ones that don't target high fidelity voters. That we find that if we, when we're running things at least 26 days prior to the election, that those candidates are 20.2 times more likely to win. I was sorry, 20% more likely to win than candidates who, ran things on a GOTV basis, sooner or closer to the election. From a frequency standpoint, we find that, if you run ads at least 40 times, you're 15% more likely to win. And then when you run OTT, you add another 12%. So you start adding all these things that stack in there, and it develops a very clear roadmap to what a successful campaign looks like digitally. Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's really two keys to the kingdom there. You really have to have both pieces. We can have good data, but if we don't have the vehicle up delivery or for delivery, then it's going to be a lot more difficult. So having a really good data set is great, but then you also need to think about that vehicle for delivery and that activation. So having both of those things together is really going to set your campaigns up for success. All right, we can go ahead and go on to the next slide, where we're going to talk a little bit more about political OTT access. So back over to Stacy.
And I foreshadowed this one with the kind of talk on OTT. But when you think about the media types El Toro typically delivers, you've got display, which is where we started 10 years ago. We've got video, which is typical midstream pre-roll on kind of traditional web properties like ESPN.com, MSNBC.com, FoxNews.com, and then OTT, which is our fastest growing media type. And within OTT, you've got any of a number of connected devices, and you've also got so you think about streaming television on top of something like your iPad or your phone. And then you've also got connected TVs. Our team here had built into over 500 different OTT networks. So instead of a campaign having to go out and do a deal with, AMC and Samsung and Tubi and Frevo and like all of these different platforms, we're platform agnostic. We look across almost every possible OTT platform for that voter that you want to target, and we target them no matter where they happen to be watching, if there are OTT paid spots on those platforms. It gives you the broadest possible way to communicate with individual voters via targeting across all these different platforms. The other thing that we're finding this year is that there's going to be not nearly enough OTT inventory in select states. So we've been out, fervently working with like some of our larger campaigns and some of our larger publishers to make sure that we've got enough inventory available for both. So if you're in a very contested state, we probably need to be talking early, if we haven't already spoken with you, about what your plans are, so we can make sure that we reserve enough inventory for you for that contested state. And those contested states are going to be ones where you've got hotly contested U.S. Senate primaries, hotly contested gubernatorial races, and even you can be in a very contested district where you're going to have a targeted U.S. congressional seat. So you'll know if you're in a contested race, and that's the kind of thing that you want to make sure that you include us in your plans early, so that we can ensure that we've got enough inventory locked up for you.
Absolutely. And I think that OTT is also a really good avenue to reach the younger voter audience as well. We see that media consumption continues to go up and up and up for digital consumption. However, those budgets are still kind of lingering around regular traditional media. So we would love to help get some of that budget into these digital avenues and digital media sources.
Well, think about it. I mean, like if you think about like traditional, broadcast, most people, between 18 and 28 aren't watching traditional broadcast. In fact, I saw a study the other day that if you're between 18 and 28, you're more likely to consume news on TikTok than Fox News and MSNBC combined. But if you take something like Crunchyroll, which is a anime streaming service that we have a ton of inventory available on, that's an ideal place to reach that target audience.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of goes back to what you said earlier about that channel mix too. Video and CTV or OTT, the combination of both are a very, very powerful combination. And just a thing that I think a lot of people overlook oftentimes is not doing that media mix. So omni-channel is going to be your best friend during political season. All right, and then lastly, we have here is the El Toro political guarantee. This is one of my favorite things. I'm going to let Stacy talk about it just because I think it is so unique to El Toro. So Stacy, if you'd like to go over this slide.
It is unique, and it's actually an example of us listening to clients. I was in DC 6 years ago, and I was talking to a client, and I laid out hey, here's how we're different. We've got these patents, we've got proprietary technology, we've got the best data, we're the most accurate. And he looks me straight in the eye and is like, you know what? Everyone says that. And I said, well, our stuff actually works. We measured after the campaigns. We know it actually works. And he goes, well, everybody says their stuff works. How can you prove it to me? And I finally said, well, we measure it so well, we could, if you used us for a GOTV campaign, and you used us in, call it the last 6 weeks leading up to the election, and you delivered at least 40 ads to each of the people that we were targeting, and a few other criteria, we could guarantee that it works. We could guarantee that if we take a group of people we target with ads compared to a group of people we don't target with ads, the group of people we target would be at least 5% more likely to turn out than the group of people we don't target. And if we don't deliver on that, we'll give you half your money back. And the client looked at me, he's like, well, nobody's ever told me that before. Like that makes you different. And, so we've been doing this now 6 years, and still no one else has bothered to do it. And again, like when I said earlier, like we think about you after the election, we go back and measure your campaigns after the election and say, if we were doing a GOTV campaign, did we actually get more voters out? These are the types of things that as a group of engineers, computer scientists, data scientists, our team care about, that we care dearly Does our product work? Because we don't just work in political, we work for major brands like Ford and Toyota and Walmart, and they demand accountability. And, in political, the election's over, you won or you lost. People just kind of forget about the ad tech platform. But we don't forget about it because this is what we do, and we want to make sure that we're delivering the best possible service to our clients.
Thank you, Stacy. So I think that kind of wraps up the content for today. I do encourage you all to submit any questions that you have. Like I said previously, we have 2 really awesome resources on this call today. So send any questions you have about political, about data, about activation, or El Toro, and we will start to go through some of those questions now. All right.
Actually, as I say,
Yeah,
I
go
see
ahead.
one that I'd like to answer. So Vincent asked, do you measure all campaigns after the election or only the ones with over $100,000 spends? So yes, Vincent, we measure. We actually that longitudinal study that I showed, we showed one of those slides was all campaigns across the history of El Toro. So we do measure all campaigns across to some degree post-election. The only ones that we can guarantee are above 100 grand because we actually find that we need a statistically valid sample size to make sure that we've got consistency of results. If we've got a very small campaign, any of a number of things can start to influence voter turnout. In fact, one of the things that can really influence voter turnout in a very small campaign is how much you go door to door, and how well your GOTV efforts are working. Your physical GOTV, like driving people to the polls. But when you get a campaign above $100,000, you get to a statistically valid sample size that we know we can move that needle.
Thanks for taking that one, Stacy. And Paul, Stacy, if you all have anything to add to one another's responses, this is very informal, so feel free to jump in and make it very conversational. We do have another one from Joe. Are you identifying voters whose registration is being challenged by a political party or candidate?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, we do. We do identify. We don't identify voters as being challenged, meaning registrations being challenged. But if a state flags somebody as inactive, we incorporate the inactives into our file. So we got a question today from a consultant we do work with in Wisconsin, and they said, well, how come your number is about 1 million records larger than the Wisconsin state voter file? It's because Wisconsin only publishes publicly its active voters. What we do is we put the inactives in there. So you have the choice. You can choose to have them in there or not. And those inactives are people who, for numerous reasons, have gone into that category. Usually it's because they don't live there anymore. They still live there. They just haven't voted in a number of cycles. But if they're being challenged in some way, they usually fall into that inactive category and then have to sign an affidavit upon voting. But we do keep those individuals in there.
Gotcha. Thanks, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see. Thanks everybody for submitting these. This is a really great turnout. Let's see. How do you handle states that don't have a lot of data at the SOS?
Yeah, so that's Secretary of State. And what ends up happening with those state files is we end up having to do a lot of hole filling. So if you take a state like Texas, for example, we just updated our Texas file today. Texas takes a lot of work to be able to build together. Fiercely independent, which is great, but each of those counties, 254, goes in with its own set of rules, its own set of data. So what we end up having to do is basically fill in gaps where the counties left them out, whether that's from party affiliation, age, gender even. Some of the southern states, southeastern states tend to have to report back race and ethnicity data. So what L2 does is build out models across the country based on these. So we build some internal models, and then we work with partners such as Haystack to build out additional models on top of that. But as part of our standard taxonomy, we are adding in things like we're buying age information, we're buying or we're doing our own gender modeling. We do the most sophisticated ethnic coding that exists in any data, bar none, whether it's voter or consumer-based information. So we've got a lot of rich resources on our end to be able to fill in the gaps where the states do leave it out.
Great, that's very good to know. I did see one in here, and I actually just lost it because we have so many, but it was regarding, since we do have the IDs down to the home level, how do we deal with those privacy issues? So I think that could be answered probably on both L2 and El Toro's ends. So if one of you want to start.
Paul, why don't you take it from your end and then I'll take it from our end.
Oh, okay. I thought you were just punting on the issue, Stacy.
No, I will never punt on an issue.
No, I'm just joking. Yeah, no, privacy is always one of those that when you see the map and I zoom down to an individual household, it's like, let me ask you about privacy. That one usually triggers it. Privacy is something that we do care deeply about. We have a universal opt-out as part of our system. So all, even though only a handful of states require it, we do remove people both from the voter and the consumer databases. Again, not required, but we do it anyway. But really, when we're working with providers such as El Toro, there's anonymization that goes into effect with the audiences themselves. While you can have that household and individual level targeting, there are lots of ways to ensure that the return data is not being exposed to other third parties or back to even L2. We don't see really any of that. All we're doing is pushing out an audience in one direction. Those people are being spoken to. And then while you're getting broad-based metrics back, that sort of individual level information is something that we always try to stay away from.
By the way, Dave who asked that question lives in North Carolina, and he was thankful that you didn't zoom into his home.
Sure, it's nice.
And Dave, like from a couple of different angles. First of all, and Paul kind of alluded to this earlier. If you have an L2 license and you go run a list in L2, we're actually not receiving from L2 a list of addresses. We're receiving from L2 a list of L2 IDs. So like wherever we can choose not to work with PII, we choose not to work with PII. If you don't have an L2 license, but would still like to use L2 data, we can pull that data for you. We can create that audience and then just charge you a surcharge, a little bit extra CPM on top of the ad campaign and run those ads for you. And we actually find that for a lot of political consultants that we work with, as the campaign season really gets really hot, they just don't have the labor to go like pull audiences and do all that type of stuff. And, and we do. So, that's one of those things that is your partner will lean in and help you with like, hey, if you need that audience pulled, we can pull that audience for you. We'll deliver that campaign as a managed service, so you don't have to worry about pacing and those types of things. But PII and protection of individual privacy is a core component of what we do. We've actually brought on a team of people that we've got, our general counsel's a former DOJ attorney, our associate general counsel's former FBI, our head of information securities, former NSA. So the protection of individual privacy and compliance are just core competencies for us. And it's one of those things that when you work with large consumer brands, they're going to insist on. And when you work with large pharmaceutical companies, they're going to insist on. And that's, kind of our core client base outside of politics. And that by the way, is actually something you should probably look at when you're looking at a firm to do ad tech and political. If, you want a firm that's got, such good technology that it's used across any industry. And then we sell our technology and license it to lots of firms that then add like political creative and all those things on top of it. So a lot of the firms you see out there that are doing like really interesting things, we're actually like the basis of that technology underneath it. But if somebody's like, hey, like we have our own proprietary technologies and that type of stuff, but we only sell to political. Well, if it's awesome, like why wouldn't you be selling it to like big consumer brands and those types of things as well?
Thanks, Stacy. We have another one in here that's a little bit more CTV related. This person is asking, do you have a detailed list of CTV deals that you have available in platform? So maybe we could just talk a little bit about our CTV inventory here.
Sure. And we actually, we've got about 500 different publishers that we have deals with. That's actually a question that I've been asked a couple of times recently. So what we'll do is we'll just put out a blog post and list all of our publishers, at least ones that we can publicly list. So we've got to go through our agreements with them and make sure which ones we can and can't list. But if you open up a ticket, if you're a current client, we'll make sure we get that to you. And I just need to make sure I know which ones we can and can't publish.
Thank you. And there's another one here too that is probably for you, Stacy. Can I do a geofence and then get email addresses or cells? So for relational organization recruitment.
I'm reading that one as well. So we don't really sell data like that. We actually, and by the way, there are companies that will do that. That you can go do a geofence, and then they'll give you email addresses or cell phone numbers, but we think that that is a very gray area that is being investigated increasingly by state and federal regulators. When we talk about protection of PII, cell phones are, a classic example of PII. So we're very careful about how we handle that data and what we do with it. In fact, we don't even share, data with our ad tech networks. We build our own technology into the networks and actually have their streams of their bid streams run through our segmenters. So they don't even get, components that could be considered PII, like an MAID from us.
I would say just on the delivery of actual individual data, we do it not from a data collection where we ping a household and then suck that information back up, but we do sell information that does come through a third-party opt-in. So essentially, they've agreed to receive commercial communications for an email in particular, but we also do that with cell phone numbers as well. So it's just all part of our larger identity graph, which is used to do matching and other things like that. But it can be used for direct communication as well.
Awesome.
I love Scott's question here. If a campaign manager asks, what's the number one reason you would use El Toro for political, what would you say? And Scott, it's all about accuracy. You look at, most targeting is based off of cookies or based off of IP addresses. Cookies are where all of this waste and inaccuracy started. And the world's moving away from cookies, but it's lots of people are moving to a HIM, and a HIM is actually less accurate than cookies. IP addresses are definitive. They're deterministic. They're not probabilistic. And when we look at, when we talk about delivering ads to the right person at the right time, and the only reason we can deliver, provide a political guarantee to people is because we know our stuff works. And that's really putting your money where your mouth is. Everybody says they're the best. Well, if they're really the best, why don't they stand behind their product like we do?
Mm-hmm. All right, trying to be mindful of the time here. We probably have time for a couple more questions, so I will take another one here. I have a software that can aggregate so that only 10 households or 100 households can be targeted based upon a specific profile. Is that how you anonymize?
Was that
from? I thought that was for you, but
so we don't, in terms of us, we don't anonymize. So when we pass it to partners, though, the segments become segments versus it being anonymized into, as individual level data. So that's what I was referring to, is when we work with partners such as El Toro, they're taking the data, they're building it into these segments, and then the audiences are delivered upon that way. A lot of individuals and households match, but not all of them do. So essentially, I mean, Stacy, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe everything goes into this sort of anonymized segment, and then it's delivered upon versus it being like a direct mail piece or something where you say, okay, this is Jane Smith at 123 Main Street. We have now delivered that, it's a little different.
Yeah, it goes into our segmenters, which connect into the bidders for the ad tech networks. And one segmenter could have thousands of campaigns. So as we see bids come through for OTT, connected TV, display, we'll bid on for specific campaigns, and then just settle it all out on the end, because we know what creative and all that type of stuff go with that bid, but we're the only ones that know that. It's kind of a black box as it flows through there for us. I also loved Sergio's question for Paul. Is urbanicity on the file, or is it through the tool?
Yeah, that's in both. So it's in our, well, excuse me, it's in our file, in the L2 file, but is not provided with the Secretary of State file. It's we worked with a researcher actually in North Carolina who helped us build this out by zip code. Census provides it by county, but as many of you know, counties can be very diverse in terms of their urbanicity. So we built it by zip code, and it's far more accurate, and it's been extremely popular.
Great, thank you. One more here from Troy. How does L2 collect its demographic data? For instance, education. Is it just information from public institutions, or are you able to collect info from private schools?
That's a good question. So really, it's a combination of commercially available data. So it's primarily going to come from credit bureau type information. So as you interact with the financial system, there's going to be requests and requirements of you throughout that process. If you've ever done the dark web scan with Experian or any of that stuff, that all is them collecting that information. Now, we don't get back a lot of the specific information, like which retailer you shopped at specifically, or how much you spent or what you bought. But what we can tell is that this person is interested in motorcycles because they bought motorcycle parts, or they bought something. So it's all very, it's tied to that. Same thing goes with education level. So with degree attained, we're essentially saying that we can find within a zip plus 4 the individuals who attained a certain level of degree. Then, and we know those for a fact because it was reported by the credit bureau. Then from there, we do a model based on that area, based on their income, based on their home values, things like that, to say this person is likely has a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or high school diploma or less than high school diploma. So we have all of that in the system that way, broken out as likely and extremely likely in those categories.
Gotcha. All right, so this might be our last one for today, but if L2 is built in these DSPs, any reason why we buy L2 political data?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's built into different platforms, and we work great. El Toro has our file. It's awesome. And we love working with them directly. But, for people, you were talking about omni-channel campaigning earlier, Jordan. I mean, omni-channel, I would say, should incorporate some of the other methodologies, including canvassing, going door to door, doing postal mail, things like that. And then, putting it together. So we had a campaign that actually utilized a combination of El Toro to be able to follow up with people directly after they were doing door knocking. So they go door knocking using one of our other partners, eCanvasser, take that data, put it back into L2, build an audience of people who weren't home, and then target an ad to that person saying, we'd love to connect with you. We'd love to meet with you. And they built out a campaign around that, and they won. So, this is the kind of thing where you're seeing that combination of methods, sort of using the offline data, which we also provide, and then of course pushing it to a platform like El Toro.
Also, advanced modeling. Very like larger campaigns are going to have their own analytics and data science team, and they're going to want to do not only advanced modeling, but they're going to want to do very micro targeted segments. It's funny, the bigger the campaign gets, the smaller their segments often get, because they want to communicate. Like, we can target one-to-one. They want to communicate to you with very call it targeted and intimate ads that based off of what they know about you. So taking that data and cutting it down into segments of several thousand people, but for a statewide campaign is not uncommon for a U.S. Senate campaign.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And becoming more common down ballot too. They're doing more of these campaigns, are doing more of their own sort of model creation and analysis as these tools become universally available, which is really interesting.
Yeah, we've seen some Metro Council races here in Louisville that they have very good access to some of our staff. So some of our staff have counseled them on hey, why don't you do neighborhood level ads for a Metro Council race in in Jefferson County, Kentucky. So you'll see neighborhood level issue ads, and that might be 50 neighborhoods in one Metro Council district, and they'll have 50 different ad sets and 50 sub campaigns with 50 different sub audiences.
Which that's new and political from when we started with all this to now. I mean, it is amazing what's now available. I mean, this used to be a consumer specific type thing, cutting 50 different audiences to 50 different, doing all this different creative. But now it's moved far beyond consumer and moved into political. So it's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both. This wraps up our webinar today. So thank you everybody for joining us today and for all of your wonderful questions. Thank you, Paul and Stacy, for being on the panel and for answering all of the wonderful questions. If anybody needs more information, feel free to reach out to your sales executive or eltoro.com/contact. We also have Paul's info here. So if you would like to get in touch with Paul or need more information about L2, feel free to send him an email here. And then the last thing is just this little QR code. This will take you to El Toro's political page on our website for more information. And I did see quite a few messages come through about if this recording will be sent out after, and it will be posted on our LinkedIn and things like that as well, if you had anybody that missed it. But that is a wrap for today. So thanks for everybody for joining, and we'll catch you next time.